but I just want to go through the technical analysis and potentially how we're reaching a pretty critical point now with Bitcoin. So before the corona situation that emerged at the end of 2019, we're approaching 10,000, and then around mid-March we had a massive dump. So yeah, around a 50% drop in value of Bitcoin, but then we saw quite a strong recovery by Bitcoin, and at the time it was stronger than what we saw in the stock markets. And one of the reasons probably because that's before a lot of the injection, government intervention, and central banks printing more money. But essentially we've had a strong recovery, and then around at the end of April we essentially reclaimed what we had before the COVID situation, or the impacts of the COVID situation, so around 8,500, 8,600. And then there's continued uptrend. Some thought there might have been some consolidation or maybe a pullback, but it continued, and then I think we're pretty much exhausted around 10,000. It touched 10,000 a few times, and then a strong rejection from 10,000, and then it has ever since had little retests of this upper trend line. But essentially here we have a symmetrical triangle, and that's around about 9,300. So it's essentially been around 9,300, but it's had these kind of lower boundaries and these upper boundaries, and it has been in between those boundaries since. And it has tested the upper boundaries as mentioned. So at here we could have seen a continuation of this ascending triangle, but it is clear that it was exhausted here, and we got the rejection. And then there's a few occasions, as mentioned, around 9,800, and then more recently about 9,700, where it tried to break this upper bound, but it's failed to do that. And as a result, it's been relatively stable since the end of April. It's been around this area, which is good, because we've essentially built up a new kind of price point, but if we break below we could go down quite a bit. So yeah, if we break down on about 8,400, could get to the 7,000s, but let's not think about that yet, as we're not there. But nevertheless, we have been in this band, and we have been very stable, increasingly stable. And you can see by these Bollinger Bands surrounding the candles. And Bollinger Bands essentially give a sense of volatility. And what we've seen is we're seeing lower and lower and lower and lower and very low volatility, as opposed to here during the corona drop where we had about 50% decrease. Bollinger Bands are very wide, indicating we had really high volatility. But it is good to see that there is some consolidation, and I'd say at the moment, as mentioned, the symmetrical triangle is around about 9,300, but in more recent months we've kind of trended below the kind of middle point of the symmetrical triangle, and at times we have tested the kind of lower bands. As you can see, the wicks, we have wicks below the band, and thankfully those have rebounced. So it has been tested on both sides. Earlier on is more of the top side, and now it's more so the lower side. And as mentioned, the volatility is low, and that makes me think we will have, or more likely to have, a big breakout either to the upside or the downside within the next month, I would say. But that said, we can have months on months on months of just very low volatility. That's possible. As we saw just before the crypto winter, we had periods of very low volatility for several upon several months, and then there was a massive drop. But equally, when we got out of the crypto winter, again we had months on months on months of very low volatility. So that's not to say that we can keep on going around this bound, this increasingly narrow bound for months on months. But what it shows is, given all the indicators, is the price is pretty stable. There have been occasions where we try to break up and break down, but there have been rejections pretty quickly. And we can see by the RSI indicator that the price is pretty neutral at the moment in terms of which direction it's going. Same with the MACD, is pretty neutral position on the daily time frame. And here we can see, yeah, we are ever so slightly on the negative side, but overall still fairly neutral. But as these upper and lower bands start to converge, that makes me think that we will get a price action either way, either side, very soon. But then again, as I mentioned, it is a possibility that we can have prolonged periods of stability and decreasing volatility at the same time. But from a local perspective, looking at a micro local perspective, I do think a price move is imminent. But on a more macro scale, one can argue we would expect something big in terms of movement towards the end of the year, around November, December time. So it depends on how much weighting you put on this local area and on the macro trends as well, on the larger perspective. But either way, I think whether we're looking at the local or the macro perspective, I think they more than ever are starting to agree with each other, which basically means that we should expect a movement at least in the second half of this year. That's the least I can say. But at the moment, I think there will be a breakout, and the breakout will be quite big because of the volatility. When it reduces and it's stable and it's very quiet, generally the breakouts are bigger under those conditions. For me, I hope it's to an upside, but equally, if we do retrace, then hopefully it'll be the last retrace until we go for a nice bull run, exceeding 10,000, 12,000 and potentially 14,000. So we'll have to wait and see. There's obviously a lot of other things going on in terms of DeFi, in terms of PayPal's adoption of cryptocurrencies, the ongoing ETF approvals, and there are a lot of other projects as well that could potentially affect the general market sentiment on Bitcoin, and also of course the economy with the coronavirus and the printing of money from central banks and devaluing people's money over time. That is an obvious economic risk, and as a result people might find investing or keeping Bitcoin to be a better protection of their money than holding cash. So that is something to bear in mind, and yeah, so I think you wanted an answer in terms of a definite kind of direction, but that is almost impossible to give by anyone. But what I can say is expect a move quite imminently this year. So let me know your thoughts, any comments. I'd be interested to listen to. Otherwise, I'll see you next time, and take care.